Well, thank you, Larry. Good morning. It is good to be with you. Thank you guys for coming out. It is great to be here and part of this discussion on the 20th Annual American Democracy Conference. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. Those are the words that Charles Dickens begins A Tale of Two Cities with. And I think those words describe in many ways where the American political process is right now today. We are seeing on substance, on policy, I think very significant victories for the American people. If you look at how the economy is going right now. The economic picture, a few months ago, the New York Times wrote, "It is impossible to say enough good things about these job numbers," which, you know, it was painful for the New York Times to write those words. But if you look at our economic prospects right now, we've got the lowest unemployment in decades. We've got the lowest African American unemployment that's ever been recorded. We've got the lowest Hispanic unemployment that has ever been recorded. We have the lowest Asian American unemployment that's ever been recorded. We have the lowest unemployment for women in 70 years. And we have the lowest unemployment for young people in 52 years. We've got a lot of students here, a lot of young people who will be coming out of school, hopefully getting jobs. Those are encouraging times when you see the economy booming, and I believe the reason the economy is booming is as a direct result of cutting taxes and cutting job-killing regulations. On the policy side, I think we've seen very positive steps forward. When it comes to national security and foreign policy, I think we've also seen very strong steps forward. I think America today is standing more closely with our friends and allies, and we have been defeating our enemies. That is a strong position for the country to be in. At the same time, today is a deeply divided time in our country. There's an anger, there's a rage that I think isn't healthy. I think it isn't good for our country. The anger that we're seeing, we saw it in this last election, I think we'll see it in 2020. That anger and rage tearing us apart corrodes our democracy. How it plays out in the next 2 years, I don't know. We had an election where both sides were happy at some of the results. Democrats were hoping for a giant blue wave. Some Republicans were hoping for a giant red wave. And we ended up with a little bit of both. The Senate side, Republicans increased our majority from 51 to 53. At the same time, we lost the House of Representatives. I think what that's likely to yield for the next 2 years is a deeply divided and, sadly, I fear, even paralyzed Congress. In the House, I think the Democrats have unleashed some of the angriest voices on the left. I think we're going to see 2 years of investigations, of subpoenas, and we may well see impeachment. I think that anger and rage is going to have to burn out some more before we can come together and enact major legislative reforms that we should be doing. From my perspective, what I hope to spend a lot of the next 2 years doing, certainly doing what I can to continue legislating. The last 2 years have been incredibly productive, but we've had Republican Houses and Senates. My optimism level is diminished for how much productivity we're going to have with divided government. So much of the next 2 years, from my perspective, I want to focus on moving people's hearts and minds, on talking about substance and issues. And one thing I would encourage to each of you, look, there are people in this room that have a whole variety of political views. That's a wonderful thing. Let me encourage each of you to embrace civil discourse, to embrace discussions of ideas. You know, last year, I did 3 different CNN debates with Bernie Sanders. We did one on health care, 2 on tax policy. Each of those was 90 minutes long. They were town halls. In those 90-minute debates, the one we did on health care, there was more substance on health care policy in that 90-minute debate than I promise you in the entire presidential campaign. Like the presidential campaign, you have debates where everyone speaks for about 60 seconds on a topic. It is not difficult for someone to read their talking points for 60 seconds. And you get very little depth or substance in that kind of format. And one of the reasons why I was glad to do those town halls with CNN, I was glad Bernie agreed to do them, is that the debates were on issues, they were on substance, they were on what works. And we can have real, meaningful discussions about what policies are successful. You know, there's a tendency in political discourse to demonize your opponents, to caricature your opponents, to think of anyone who disagrees with you, well, they've either got to be stupid or evil. Those are the 2 options. Either they're not smart enough to know the right answer, they're just blithering morons. Or even worse, they are smart enough to know the right answer, and they just want people to suffer. And if you want to see that phenomenon on full display, all you have to do is go on Twitter. And Twitter has an odd effect of sort of throwing gasoline on the fire and amplifying the extremes, where people will say bitter and nasty things on Twitter that they'd never say to an actual real live human being in front of them. But here's the real truth of it. Most people are neither stupid nor evil. Years ago, about, I don't know, 10 years ago or so, I was invited to give the commencement address at Berkeley, at their school of government. And at the time, this was long before I was elected to the Senate, I'd been Solicitor General of Texas, which is the chief lawyer for the state in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was actually kind of funny how I got the invitation, which, you know, I mean, me giving a commencement at Berkeley is not a natural place you would expect to find me. And the backstory, as I understood it, was that the head of their government department looked and said, you know, gosh, every one of our speakers has been liberal Democrats over and over and over again. Maybe we should have someone from the other side of the aisle. But they didn't really know anyone from the other side of the aisle. And so, as I understand it, the head of the department called a government professor at University of Texas, figured, all right, you're in Texas, you got to know a Republican. And so he called the professor and he said, well, look, you know, the guy we had last year, I'd given the commencement address at UT's government department the year before. He said, he did an all right job. Why don't you ask him? So suddenly I get the invitation. Now, it's interesting. As I said, it was about 10 years ago. I remember it was the very dawn of Facebook. It was like right when Facebook was starting to exist. And my going there prompted protests. There was a group, I still remember, it was 93 students who formed a Facebook group protesting that the school had destroyed their education by inviting this horrible, horrible person to address them. And, you know, I thought a long time about what to say in that scenario. Now, you know, we had the protest. My wife's comment at the time was, Heidi was exactly right. She said, good God, you're not nearly important enough to protest. Like, thank you, dear. So I thought a lot about what to say, and I decided to give a speech on diversity, but intellectual diversity. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion in the academic world about diversity on everything except on ideas. And the message that I wanted to convey is, listen, don't fall into, keep the passion that many of you have right now. As I pointed out, Berkeley has a long, long tradition of active, passionate civil engagement. I said, don't let go of that passion. Don't let go of your zeal, the fire in your belly to change the world. Keep that desire. Don't just settle into middle-aged mediocrity. keep the burning desire to make a difference in your community, to make a difference in the world. But learn to engage with people understanding that someone can disagree with you, how someone can take the issue that you care most passionately about, that animates you to your bones, and someone of good intelligence and good morals and good conscience can look at that issue you care the most about and arrive upon a conclusion 180 degrees opposite of your own. How your mother could reach that position. And the point I said is, look, if you ever hope to persuade anybody, whether in law or politics or business or life, you've got to understand, you've got to take people from where they are and then treat them with civility, with decency, with respect. So I like those Bernie Sanders debates because, look, if we're talking about, if we agree that everyone wants to see people live a better life, then we can talk about what policies are most likely to produce that. And we can have a debate, for example, about are high taxes or low taxes better for people's lives? What are the results in the economy? What are the results in families? And we can talk about that and have actually an intelligent conversation. If, on the other hand, we immediately go to, you're an evil, stinking bastard, you don't tend to have many productive conversations about how to solve a problem. And so that's something I would encourage each of you is as we look at democracy, to think about democracy as designed to have conflicts. Here's an interesting point, by the way. You know, gridlock is not a bug, it's a feature. Our checks and balances system, if you go back and read Madison's Federalist 10, he talked about factions. He said we will always have factions, what we'd call special interests today. And from Madison's perspective, the most dangerous thing was for one faction to seize control of government and to unify against the people, that he saw that as a threat to our liberty. And so Congress was designed so that the different factions would battle each other, would check and balance each other, and that in turn would protect the liberties of the people. So that conflict, that disagreement is part of the system. It's healthy. But it also takes a degree of restraint. I remember when I was in college, I was a college debater, so yes, I was one of the cool kids. And in college, I was chairman of the Conservative Party in the Debating Society. A very good friend of mine was the leader of the Liberal Party in the Debating Society. So we would debate every week on all sorts of different topics. And, you know, we'd go have a debate, and then afterwards we'd go out, you know, I'd call him a communist, he'd call me a fascist, and we'd go get a beer. And that's actually, there's, I think, some life wisdom in that. Of don't take yourself so damn seriously. That's part of how you can have a debate and a discussion about what works, is if every position that someone that disagrees with you is offensive to your soul, just like relax, count to 10. And try to begin with the assumption that we're trying to solve problems together. That won't always work. We're going to have disagreements. That's fine. But have the discussions be on issues, on substance and what works. I think that is the right way to approach politics. I think we're seeing relatively little of that nationally. Look, one of the things I was grateful for in Texas. Texas, we had one hell of a race. But I was grateful that race focused on issues and substance and policy, and the policy agenda that I laid out was markedly different from the policy agenda of my opponent. And we had a debate with the people of Texas about what policies work. I think that's the way politics is meant to operate, and I hope we see more of that.